Hello, welcome to LoFi Bedtime Very Tales. I don't like that. Hello, welcome to LoFi Bedtime Very Tales. I don't like that either. Hello, I don't like that either. Hello, welcome to LoFi Bedtime Very Tales. I hope you are thinking, feeling, and behaving well. I really do. Life is much more enjoyable when those three things are working together. In this episode, I present to you the tale of Brother Bean. There are several messages in this story. One is to always believe in yourself without fail. Another is to try to remain calm in difficult situations. And another is to always let your imagination come alive to create works of art, for the act of doing them can be the reward in itself. And other times, the reward can be your life changing wonderfully forever. Please always believe in yourself. And always remember to do things today to make tomorrow better.
Well, hey there. I hope all is rolling right on the right road for you. I heard something the other day and it catapulted me cattywampus back to many a year ago. Have I ever told you about my best buddy, precious pal, and all-around phenomenal friend, Brother Bean? Oh, I'm certain I've regaled you with some kind of something, especially if somebody brings up hot pepper eating contests or tall tale testaments. I know I spin my tales without any encouragement. It's been reported to be a gift, or a talent, or a means of finding myself alone with my solitude, unless I am able to wrangle myself on in. I'm likely to waver onto other mildly related topics, so I'll start speaking on Brother Bean now, unless you have other places to patronize and can't stay a spell. Here we go now. Brother Bean was just on a whole nother level compared to just about everybody else. Heck, he could have had a conversation with just about anyone on anything. One moment he could be captivating the mayor of town on a recent escapade with varying levels of credulity while sipping on a purple cream soda. His favorite, and eventually mine as well. Or he could be whistling back at the ravens that ran our block. He'd whistle something, and then the raven would fly off and come back and land on his shoulder and caw-caw something in his ear. He'd giggle and declare something like, "Well, ain't that a rush?" Brother Bean had only been 4 years older than my 9, but he'd still spent a lot of time with me. I had experienced some hardships as a youth, and I think he had kin that was related to my pa's employers, so he may have been encouraged to keep an eye or so on me so as I would not stray into the land of truancy, skipping school for those of you who prefer less fancy terms, petty crimes such as I gone got me some free saltwater taffy, and all-around ignorance such as I thought there was only one ocean. I spent several summers with Brother Bean, and many an after-school afternoon with him and his dog. His dog was half basset hound and half beagle, so you know that she was all howl. She was a sweetie patootie. Brother Bean had bestowed upon her the wonderful name that is Green. And before you even think, no, she did not go by Green Bean. That had been a predictable thing, and Brother Bean was only predictable in being unpredictable. Since he fancied himself as someone who never ceased the celebration of Mother Earth, he asserted that Green's last name was Clean. So she was Green Clean. And if she were to be extra wound up like a tomcat that fell into a field of catnip, he'd call her the Green Clean Machine, because he liked the cadence of it all when he'd call her up from a done-too-much-induced nap. Brother Bean had a dog named Green, whose nickname was Green Clean Machine. She'd lick your toes, but not your hands, the sweetest old hound all across the land. Brother Bean was mostly found to be strolling and sauntering around town without anything on his feet but his skin and whatever his steps had accumulated and taken them. He claimed that the dust, grass, mud, water, weeds, sticks, rocks, and all else were particularly pleasing to his feet. Now, Brother Bean could walk on his hands just as easily as he could walk on his feet. But Brother Bean reported that walking on his hands did not provide him the same level of comfort, so he did not engage in that activity as much as walking on his feet. I could not do that. I was not capable of walking on my hands with such effortless dexterity. I've tried, I've failed, I've accepted the fact that this shall not happen for me. Now Green always walks on her hands, even when she is taking paws. Oh boy, that was an embarrassing word pun that is much better read than spoken. Well, Brother Bean and I, with Green, in or not in tow, would head down to Sawyer's Pond to spend some time. Some might think we were fishing, since we brought fishing poles and hand shovels to get those wiggly, slimy worms that some call night crawlers. I'd call them earth fingers, as I testify that if you pluck them right out of the ground, they moved around in a similar manner as to which our fingers do when we wiggle them. Now, Brother Bean heard me say that, and he snickered as if he had the laughing hiccups. Now, that was the first time, there would be many more, that Brother Bean had me recognize and appreciate my imagination. We never actually fished, though, and we never disturbed the settled soil either. We never had any intention to. It was just pleasant to go sit and do a whole lot of nothing but have the shade of a magnolia tree and the breeze from the southwest tickle our tousled hair. Brother Bean would educate me on all the flora of the region. That's the plants and flowers in the area, if you didn't know. He would tell me which flowers created which colors, and which said flowers would look best with one another in a complementary color kinda way. For example, the wild goose's berry matched well with the enchanting black gamecock iris, as well as the great blue lobelia. Now, you might think that he'd pluck them beauties right out of the ground to demonstrate this to me, but he did not. Brother Bean asserted that all living things had to live their full life circle without any interference, especially from something as silly and harmful as the human hand. Furthermore, I didn't particularly care for fish, as I didn't particularly enjoy how they looked or felt. So I was fine without trying to catch any, and well, Brother Bean, I do reckon I never saw him eat anything that ever had a heartbeat. He'd always be nibbling on a carrot, radish, or a stalk of celery, and yes, he certainly liked his green beans. I know that his Granny Angeline always had some sort of vegetables mingling in a roux with sweet cornbread that had a texture that I still cannot describe it with the justice it truly deserves. They had a goat named Barney. He was as stinky as he was ornery. A dairy cow named Betsy. She had the sweetest eyes had ever witnessed to this day. And a mule named Bertie. Him being a mule meant that you best watch yourself around him, which I did. They had a whole garden, and Granny Angeline preserved up so much food do you think she was ready for something big and bad to happen. After things that had transpired with her grandpappy and her pappy, and the wars that other people had started, and those without much had to finish to help those with much, she would not allow a gun or a rifle anywhere near their land. Oh boy, I have gone on to a whole nother story. Back to the pond we go. Brother Bean and I would just cast our weighted lines into the water, no hook, no nothing, and we just lie back and talk. Or not talk. I once had a bullfrog sneak up on my chest when I nodded off. I awoke to said bullfrog gazing into my tired eyes, and it looked as excited as a sack of dry grits. I bid him a good afternoon, and he made a sound I cannot create with the vocal tools I have been given. We just observed one another until he determined that my breathing no longer provided him the exhilaration it initially may have. He leaped away, or is it leapt away? I can't remember, And on to more dangerous possibilities, as there were plenty of cottonmouth snakes, alligators, alligator snapping turtles, and other lethal entities around the pond those days. Speaking of which, on one spectacular afternoon, an alligator snapping turtle, who was not winning any ribbons for being the brightest bulb on the block, took a bite on my line. It had garbled up the stone that was my weight. I saw my pole being pulled to the pound as if it were tied to a horse. Brother Bean set his foot on it to cease the loss of the pole and started drawing on the line to bring whatever may be on the line for us to observe. It took some time for this to be completed. Green had an initial interest and displayed this by providing us with her signature howl. However, after a few moments, she lost it so much that she watered some flowers and took a lie down. When this prehistoric beast was pulled from the pond, you'd have thought we were back in the stage of T-Rex and the pterodactyl. It resembled something not quite so attractive as moldy potatoes that had been mixed in with beaten sweet beets and cabbage that had been ripe the year you were born. It was ugly, and it couldn't help it, so I will not be so impolite as to demean it any longer. Just as possums are not the cutest creatures we have on earth, but they surely serve many a purpose to help us. Y'all ever seen a baby possum? Oh, now they are as adorable as any kitten, calf, puppy, or yearling. I'm off the story, so back to then. Brother Bean had a plan. Big surprise. He set that ancient turtle on the bank, put his right foot, bare, remember, almost always bare, on its shell, and then began to tickle it under its chin. That thing regurgitated that weighted line within an instant. As I've told this story to other folks, they've said it was a gag reflex that involuntarily influenced the amphibious reptile to spit up that stone. I've replied that it worked, and that it is fine, and that is good enough for me. I do not know if it could ever be repeated and would never try. Those alligator snapping turtles can end your piano playing days forever, or ensure that they never start. He took his foot off its shell and it headed right back into that murky green water. I thanked Brother Bean and told him that I would never swim in that pond as long as I know that toad-taking, stumbling-making, and life-shaking reptile is on the loose. Brother Bean chuckled and plainly stated, "You'll never see me swimming in there. I swim in the clear rivers and nowhere else." Brother Bean, born of fantasies, but he'd add some spin to make a story supreme. He'd tell some tales, get my giggle grin, but I always knew what he was fabling. Now, I mentioned her earlier and will speak on her now. She be Granny Angeline. As stated, she was something else. She treated me more like I was her nephew, although I was not. She told me the secret to making her cornbread was a bit of vanilla bean and to use half-sweet cream with scalded whole milk, not scolded like an impudent young'un. Due to some internal disputes in our land many a year ago and other tragedies of years gone past, Granny Angeline was raised by her great-granny. So if you care to do the arithmetic, Granny Angeline had the manners from over 100 years ago. If you did not start a sentence with ma'am, with a please, and a may I, or a thank you when communicating with her, you would be kindly asked to leave their home until you were able to summon up your manners and employ them as expected. I made that mistake once. I felt so ashamed. I was too excited about how well her sweet grits tasted that I answered that they were delicious and did not provide the accompanying thank you. Granny Angeline instructed me to find my deportment and return with it polished and ready to apply it on another day. The sweet flavor of those grits in my mouth soured into a bitterness of shame. I looked at Green in the corner as I let myself out. She made a murmur and howl that I do believe let me know that I was related to a mule. Not a stallion or a mare, but something not quite as admirable. I was not upset in the least with Granny Angeline. I had been given a reasonable expectation and had not maintained it. All homes have different rules, and we must respect the rules of someone's home, for we are all a guest, and they have welcomed us into their private living quarters. I still remember and comport myself in that manner now, despite me being an elderly gentleman who has seen over 90-something summers. I have helped educate many a youth on how to best behave regardless of their status or their parents' station. Some folks have said that manners are free to spend and simple to learn, so all should demonstrate the ability to exercise them. And I agree.
Brother Bean's Granny Angeline had a will stronger than an ox that's mean. She'd make us all the parish's best tea and always spoke about liberty.
After several summers of spending time with Brother Bean and Green, Granny Angeline was preparing Brother Bean on how to live on his own, as she knew her song may be composing its final verse. She was calm and serene about everything, and this showed to Brother Bean that he may be able to act in a similar manner if he were to have the privilege of living a life as long and fruitful as his granny. Aside from this rather significant new development, there was one that may have portended a much more positive and promising future. There was a young lady who was Brother Bean's age, 17, who had recently moved into the area. Her name may have been Maybelline, but there was no doubts or maybes that she had not captivated Brother Bean from the first time he had glanced at her while we were in town picking up some kerosene. I believe I heard her voice first over my own voice remarking on my nonsensical observations on how the dampness in the air had not quite turned my hairs into all one large curl. If you could imagine what the sound an angel could make, that was how she sounded. I turned to look over my left shoulder and saw a figure with wavy amber hair, translucent ivory skin, and brilliant emerald eyes. Brother Bean had been wrestling with a wobbly wagon wheel and noticed I had gone silent, while he gazed straight into her soul and she into his. Her skin transformed into a blushing pink, and I sensed he aged 3 years in that moment into what most folks may call a man. I declare this to be true as he stated, "Good morning, miss." And his voice had done gone baritone. She replied with a pleasantry to us both, introducing herself as Miss Maybelline, just as her father presented out of the bank. Why, he looked at us with a sense of disgust that I had not yet experienced in my life. I knew my family was impecunious or simply as poor as overused soil, but I was clean as were my clothes. I could read, I could write, and there was a potential in me bigger than the bank that we were standing in front of. Brother Bean, always unflappable, countered the man's countenance with, "Good morning, sir. You must be the new proprietor of the business that helps our community prosper." The man never formally introduced himself to us. Instead, he furrowed his brow and made a look with his mouth like he had eaten an unripened persimmon, and then moved on. It turned out there may have been a good reason for him not to introduce himself to us, as his surname was Winkbottom. Yes, there are certainly many jokes to be made with a name such as Winkbottom, and I will allow your imagination to frolic in felicity as to coming up with some or none. Sometimes in life, it can be more fun to not do the predictable things, such as sneak off with the warm cookies straight from the oven and savagely devour them without savoring them, but instead wait to properly enjoy them with your people in a dignified manner. Anyway, Maybelline had moved to our area due to her father buying the only cotton gin in our entire parish. Maybelline had a private tutor, and she was fixing to attend a ladies' university several states over once she was ready. However, just like it can rain when the sun is shining, something happened that most folks would not think possible. Not 3 days later, Maybelline ran into Brother Bean at our general store. They both fancied black licorice and found themselves engaging in their craving simultaneously, and soon were facing one another. They each had a reactionary smile that expressed the delight their souls found in one another. 8 licorice sticks later, there would be hand-holding as sweet and pure that the energy from it would have prevented the wars that had so harshly impacted our families. Pretty quickly, Brother Bean and Maybelline would be spending most of their free time together. I thought it was wonderful and had started doing more things by myself anyhow. Brother Bean had told me that Maybelline was very intelligent and headstrong and was able to discern when either of these faculties may have been outshining the other in a manner that was not helpful. He told me her heart had to have been the most treasured thing that had ever been created. He had been developing strong feelings for her and had began to start using his pastels and paints to create colorful landscapes, for he did not think he was capable of capturing anything resembling her eternal beauty.
Brother Bean was not a Philistine. He appreciated all creative dreams. He'd always stand up for what he believed. Nothing would test his self-esteem.
Maybelline's mother would let her sneak off with Brother Bean after she had completed her studies, as her mother had kin that knew of the loyalty and the honor of his family. Her father was none the wiser, as he was too engrossed in his work and his wealth to notice the positive changes in his only child. It seemed that, as long as Maybelline was present at the supper table, her daily activities were assumed to be all in order. Brother Bean and Maybelline would go down to the swimming stream, and he would recite his or other folks' poetry. He'd tell her all about the flowers and other plants, and more often than not, he would ask her to tell him more about her. Boy, that got to snapping so much information from her that he'd sit back and just relished hearing her voice saying anything at all. It just seemed that they were charmed by one another's company, whether they were speaking or not. Maybelline thought that his creativity and calm demeanor were complimentary of her assertive and focused manner, and that they brilliantly balanced one another out. Brother Bean had confided to me in a humble and excited manner that Maybelline had began remarking on her future as their future now. And he took this as a sign that she would be giving her heart to him, and he would be as patient as anyone could ever be. As he told me this one morning, we were heading to our fishing spot. A dove landed on his left shoulder and began to coo, just like the raven, but this was different. We stopped walking, and it flew away. We both took that as a sign that he and Maybelline would be forever. And I couldn't stop talking about it all morning. I told Brother Bean I was going to tell Maybelline, and he got a cross look on his face, and I reassured him that I would do no such thing. They courted in this manner for several months, up until they were almost 18 years old. That's when Constantine showed up. Oh, I'll get to him in a moment. Thank you for your patience. By watching their romance flourish, I learned about the most genuine love that could have ever happened. There was nothing but sweetness and consideration for the sake of it, without any anticipation of reciprocation. Sometimes in life it is best to just do something kind for the act of performing it, without expecting anyone to notice or remark as to your actions.
Brother Bean and courtly Maybelline would sneak on down to the swimming stream. He'd recite her poems so eloquently, they'd always come back with smiles so free.
With that mentioning, please allow me to tell you about Constantine. Now, he was an adult closer to 30 than 20, and he had his sights on Maybelline when she became an adult. He came from money and several parishes away. His family knew her family, and so on. He had aspired to create a financial enterprise a few states away, and had learned how not to be financially solvent in a series of ill-advised blunders. Constantine was rather sour, and almost always appeared to be on the verge of sweating himself into a soak. Furthermore, he was hucklebacked, or round-backed, or soft-shouldered. I don't like to make fun of one's physical attributes that they cannot control. That notwithstanding, this man appeared to revel in how it had put others off guard, and he then took advantage of their kindness for the shortcoming by being as ornery as a copperhead that had been rolled in molasses and thrown into a sand pit that had been scorching in the summer sun. On a good day, He was as bitter as chicory soaked in a cloudy vinegar that had varying levels of putrefying yellow. I believe I have spoken enough on that. Man, he was not a gentleman, so it was not an oversight that I did not employ that term. Now here's a bit more history to this here story. There was an old-timer by the name of Lucky Pierre who traveled about and would show up in town on occasion. Now he knew Granny Angeline and would call upon her in the late afternoon as her sweet tea was just ready for sipping. He had rode the rails for years and had many adventures that he would tell me and Brother Bean. Granny Angeline had heard all of them, so she'd let us ask all the questions. Lucky Pierre presented this time with his guitar chanson. He strummed and sang into the night, and it seemed like he had some shine added to his sweet tea, which made him something of a giggle guts. All silly, but entertaining nonetheless. He told Brother Bean that he would not be leaving with his guitar, and that it was time for it to have a new owner, who would be someone capable of rousing out the sounds necessary for all to enjoy. Granny Angeline's eyes were alive with a fervor that I had not yet seen. She declared that Lucky Pierre had, quite possibly, made the best decision of his later years, as her grandson could create art out of anything. Brother Bean, without hesitation, humbly thanked his granny, and then asked Lucky Pierre how to keep the guitar in tune and what were a few chords. Lucky Pierre chuckled and stated that he'd only need to teach Brother Bean 3 chords and he'd figure the rest out, and that tuning the guitar would be as simple as choosing the right adjective for a poem. Lucky Pierre knew all about Brother Bean's compositions, as they were now being celebrated across the parishes in this part of the state. Lucky Pierre handed Chanso over and instructed Brother Bean on those 3 chords. Now I know you want to know what they were, and they were C major, G major, and G7. Brother Bean took to them chords like a catfish to a muddy stream. Lucky Pierre then bid farewell to us all. It was time for me to hit the trail myself. I caught myself a bit of a cold and stayed home for a couple days. Now when I returned, Brother Bean, why, he was playing chanson like he was one of those famous players we'd hear about from those folks that had gone to the big city. Brother Bean was not showing off. Rather, he was fixing to demonstrate his artistry yet again. He asked me if I wanted to hear a song he had created. I fully agreed, as I had pondered this may happen when I was strolling over. He played a simple song and then told me he had written a poem that he intended to put this to music, and that he had been thinking about Maybelline the entire time. Granny Angeline came outside onto the porch with Green and suggested that he play this for everyone. Now there are times in our lives that we may not comprehend what will be happening next, and this was one of those moments, as Brother Bean played and sang a song that was conceived by the purest and truest love that I have ever witnessed in my long life. Now I have authored many a couplet, sonnet, and poem for my Tracy May when I was courting her, and she remarked that no one could have ever made anything as sweet as what my feelings for her had generated. But no. Now this song changed my life, as I was able to understand that there could be one beautiful artistic thing created from the adoration and inspiration for another person, and that this thing could connect 2 souls together for the remainder of their existence. As he sang and played that simple yet wistful ballad, Granny Angeline covered her face with her gentle hands. Green gazed up at him like he was singing in Hound, and I experienced feelings that were complicated. I was so proud of him, so happy for them both, and I began to miss him, as I knew that he would be making a life with her once she heard that euphonious, heart-charming music. Granny Angeline almost crushed Chanso when she went to embrace Brother Bean once it was complete. We all had wet eyes and smiles as broad and warm as the bayou on an August afternoon after a steamy rainstorm. Granny Angeline instructed him to go play Maybelline that song tonight, as Constantine had come to town and he was fixing to make all kinds of trouble. Brother Bean reported that he would do so and then suggested that he, Green, and I head to town for some new guitar strings. He stated Lucky Pierre would get them at the Soldier's Canteen. We went on down there and secured the strings. Brother Bean was beaming with positive thoughts so much that he didn't see Constantine standing on that sidewalk waiting for us both. Green let him know that she was not keen on him. Constantine made a threat about Green, and I gave him a look that I was not aware I was capable of. Nobody is ever going to harm an animal if I am present. Ever. Some folks then began to stop and observe this senseless situation. Constantine made some crack about me being a short round who needs to keep his eyes to himself so that they are not busted. Brother Bean stated that we were just walking on by and no discourse was necessary. Constantine then shoved Brother Bean and called him soft. Brother Bean looked at me and stated, "Well, I guess I can be, and I am okay with that." Constantine challenged him to a fist fight, and Brother Bean offered that losing our religion in that way would not help in the moment or at any time after. Maybelline's father had come out of the bank and was now witnessing this as well. Constantine took notice of this and shoved Brother Bean once more. Brother Bean plainly remarked, "I'm not going to fight you, and I'm not going to have any sort of row with you. I know who you are to Maybelline. Now we are going home." We began walking away and remaining quiet. Constantine, teeming with anger that was not going to be taken out on anyone but himself, just simmered and broke out into a sweat. Meanwhile, Mr. Winkbottom called us trash, and we just walked home in silence for several moments.
Brother Bean and Andre Constantine met one day near the Soldier's Canteen. Brother Bean would not raise a hand, and his peacefulness vexed an angry man.
The further we got away from that nasty scene, the better I felt. Brother Bean ended the quiet and asked me with a vulnerable apprehension that I had not witnessed before or ever after. He asked me if I thought that Maybelline may like his song. I laughed. Is that I had been asked questions with easy answers before, but not such as this. I made some sort of statement that if she were not to fall after hearing that heartfelt piece of music, then she could not hear nor could she feel. Brother Bean then told me that he wanted it to be as perfect as it could be, for Maybelline was his future, and that he was anticipating his future since that moment he first saw her. I said her being with him was as plain as the sky and the air. He looked me in the eye and thanked me. Green and I then ran ahead as I knew that I was still a kid and he was stepping into manhood. Now, the story that goes along with the song is something to celebrate. I think I can get it right this time, as sometimes I began remarking on the weather and other details that take away from the sheer beauty a piece of art can do to change everything. Brother Bean took Chanceau over to Maybelline's and began to call on her outside of her window. He had done this before by reciting some poetry and knew how to be quiet enough so she could hear him while the bullfrogs provided noise so no others could hear him. You know how one can get accustomed to the rhythm of those bullfrogs and expect one to start where the other one leaves off. Nope, now there I go, gone one off again to rambling. Back to this tale. Maybelline had presented at her window and declared that she was ripe for hearing whatever sounds that guitar could make. Brother Bean stated he'd play his level best, and this was all new to him. And now during all of this, Mr. Winkbottom and Constantine had been out in the back of the home, sipping on some whiskey and conjuring on some conniving contriviance so as for Constantine to be with Maybelline. The way that Mr. Winkbottom tells it is that they heard the strumming of the guitar's first chord and peered around a tree and were able to see Maybelline's welcoming face in the lamplight. As Brother Bean played his composition, she began to smile and weep. Constantine muttered vulgarisms to himself as Mr. Winkbottom was catapulted back in time. Mr. Winkbottom was overwhelmed with emotions as he realized that his daughter resembled her mother more now than at any other time, and she had once looked at him in the way that his daughter presently looked at Brother Bean. Now, a father, no matter where he is on earth, will want his daughter to be happy more than anything. So Mr. Winkbottom became aware in that instant that Maybelline had found true love, and he himself was trying to stop this from continuing. He knew that would be no more. Constantine made some sort of statement that he couldn't compete with that. Mr. Winkbottom has enjoyed telling his grandchildren for years that he replied, "Yes, you certainly will not." And he honored that promise by sending Constantine away that moment. Maybelline allowed Brother Bean to finish his song before she mouthed those words that make the world go round. Brother Bean placed his right hand on his heart and repeated those very same words back to her, and then told her that he would see her tomorrow. Now, since he was so high with his feelings, Brother Bean did not walk home that night below the stars, but right along next to them. Would you now like to hear the song that changed everything forever? It goes a little something like this. Will the morning dove ever bring your love and your charming smile to me? For until the time I may hope you're mine, I will wait patiently. Will the day sun rays ever find a way to get your favor to me? For I may need aid to help you persuade your sweetheart willingly. Will the evening air ever call your dare, so you shall declare to me that you think we're due to have a love that's true, that will last past infinity? Will the midnight moon ever come too soon to try to take you from me? Please don't entertain the lies that campaigns, they are drawn to steal you from me. May the purest dawn help our love live on to the never ending of we, and be kissed with bliss ever endless. My heart is yours and shall always be. So as you can hear in that song, Brother Bean's tender sentiments were expressed devotedly and delicately, and were received as well as he could have ever dreamed. I shall tell you now that if you ever have any inclination to create something for someone, or just for the sake of doing it, please do so. You may very well make a masterpiece that may alter the course of your life, too. Well, a lot of things changed after that night. Brother Bean and Maybelline were married in ceremony in the middle of the field, with the parish priest residing over the most renowned ritual of romance. Papa Leon was more than willing to perform the nuptials wherever he was asked, for he and Granny Angeline grew up together, and she had defended him from many a bully back then. Granny Angeline was present, and the light in her that day made the sun look like it was just learning how to shine, and she was the standard by which it were to follow. Now, Green was the flower girl, and I was Brother Bean's best man. It was the first time that I had worn a necktie. Brother Bean decided that he would wear a deep blue bandana in the form of a kerchief and a white peasant shirt with dark blue dungarees to complement Maybelline's pearl white dress. And before you can guess, they were both barefoot. Lucky Pierre returned for the event, and he borrowed Chanceau to play the song that changed everything. He played it in a manner that each note was a word of it, and it resonated with everyone in attendance, which was half the parish, it seemed. Mr. Winkbottom wept so that Green went to console him. The newlyweds chose not to go anywhere special for their honeymoon, but simply just towards their future. Granny Angeline went with her angel kin 2 days after the ceremony. It was the only time in my life that I had seen Brother Bean pace back and forth. Distraught at he'd ever been, he still sorted all the affairs necessary to get through this time as though he had been a man for 20 years. That was what Granny Angeline had been teaching him all these years. The Winkbottoms both stepped in as the new parents they were to him, and he and Maybelline stay in their home for as long as they pleased. Maybelline's family was changing too, as her mother had taken ill due to her labored breathing over the poor quality of the air in our area. Mr. Winkbottom sold the cotton gin so he and her mother could go to a fair climate for her breathing condition. Brother Bean and Maybelline then decided to achieve their dreams in the nearest big city, which was a port city where he could work more on his creative pursuits and she could learn how to run a school for underprivileged girls. If I were to begin to describe all that they had done, aside from having 5 of the most brilliant, sensitive, and caring children, I would speak to you until you woke up. So I shall not do that. I will say that both were so successful and helpful that it's almost not right to say much more, for I may sound like a braggart. They were 2 caring people with hearts bigger than their bodies, and that's more than enough for all of us to say. Some say Brother Bean's insistence upon peace and creativity had inspired a whole generation of folks to try and remain calm in the face of unrest. I'll tell you my bit now. I had inherited Green, as she would never be a city dog, and we both needed each other since 2 of our continuous party had now left the party. We goofed that summer, and she found more skunks than I thought were possible. Aside from the putrid perfume, we both enjoyed our time together until it was time for her to move on too. You'd think I had half a hound's genes in me, for I howled and howled when she bid me farewell that night. I did send a correspondence to Brother Bean and Maybelline, and told Granny Angeline in a prayer that night. The final sad part of the story is now over. I've not spoken on my family at all now, have I? Well, it was me and Papa and my younger sister Cora. She had the brightest brown eyes. While they looked like the color of root beer if the sun were to be shining through the mug that it was in. She still has those 2 eyes, as do almost all of her children, except one, and that boy has my mama's eyes, which I have also been reported to favor. Listen to me spin away again. Well, back in those days, we all loved each other, and that made things easy for us. Papa worked day and night, except Sunday, and Cora would be up at the Hamlins with their girls and their silly little dogs, Maggie and Lucy. I was welcome there, but I was not the kind in those days to be around a lot of little ladies. There was always stewed vegetables on the stove and a little bit. That's Cora. She never had to wear my hand-me-down clothes, so you could say that we had enough, and that was everything. So you can see why it was a hoot for me to spend my time with Brother Bean, for he lived a different life than me and taught me how to appreciate all that I had and all that I was and all that I would be. Brother Bean had persuaded me to believe in me using my imagination to better myself and to help others, and I have been a successful individual in doing so. I do not have a palatial estate with many servants or shiny things that elicit the envy of others, but I do have many beings, human, furry, and feathered, that care about me as much as I care about them. I can communicate with a confidence that is as sure as a smile in your eyes that Brother Bean had something to do with my success. I certainly do hope that you have someone like Brother Bean in your life, whomever that may be, or maybe you may be someone's Brother Bean, and that you forever believe in yourself unfailingly.
Me and Brother Bean had time so keen, it was all so wonderfully serene. Life is simple, don't need no schemes. Believing in you is the main thing. And I wish the best for you.